Here's a family that never got the baby they asked for.
If this baby finds her family, then maybe I can find mine.
All right, let's do it. That baby's dangerous! Wolves! Perfect!
I built my plane to find my parents.
You'll find your family.
Don't worry, honey. Everything's gonna be just fine.
We're gonna die!
Welcome to Editors on Editing. I'm Glenn Garland. John Venzon's first animated feature was the highly successful South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut. Since then, he has edited and lent his skills to many terrific animated films, including Shark's Tale, Flushed Away, Chicken Run, Home, and Jimmy Neutron. His latest feature is the hilarious and crowd-pleasing Storks. John, thank you so much for being here tonight. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
I really enjoyed the movie. It was a blast. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks very much. It was a great deal of fun. One of the best experiences I think I've had as an editor on any project.
So you started off in live action, and then you ended up cutting South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut.
Yeah.
How did you make that transition, and how did that project come about?
I actually went to film school with Trey and Matt at the University of Colorado
really?
at Boulder. Yeah, and so they were just friends of mine from film school. I'm one of the few people I know that knew at the age of 14 that I wanted to be an editor. So I got into film school, and I immediately I knew I didn't want to do the directing track. So I just started volunteering to edit all of my friends' movies.
And they probably love that because most people do want to direct.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, great, we have somebody who wants to cut.
It was great. And so what ended up happening is I ended up making all of my closest friends in the world there. And so then when Trey and Matt would go and make their film, I came out to start working as an assistant editor. And I just happened to catch the luckiest break in the world. It was right as Hollywood was transitioning to digital editing. And so I got out. I didn't know a single person. I had like $700 in the bank or something like that. And I went and got trained on the Avid and the Lightworks.
Oh, that was smart.
And I just happened to be one of maybe 5 people who had training in Lightworks. And so I got a call from Brian Berdan saying, hey, do you want to come work on this movie? It's called Natural Born Killers. I could not have asked for 2 better mentors right out of the gate. Hank Corwin, ACE.
Fantastic.
Brian Berdan, ACE.
Well, you've worked with a lot of really top-notch editors. What are some of the things that you learned
From Hank Corwin, I learned immediately, don't rule out any part of the film. He would talk about how he would pay attention to before the director called action just as much as he paid attention after action was called. I was his assistant on The Horse Whisperer, and there was a section where it was Robert Redford was training the horse, and he was very stern and very intense in it, but Hank wanted to find some lightness, so he had me go through all the takes and find shots where they had called speed before he called action. And there was one take that we found where Robert was smiling, and Hank went, "Oh, that's it," and put it in, and it's in the final movie.
I know that when I was talking to Hank about The Big Short, he said that sometimes he would wait till they called cut because then the actor would relax, and then when he relaxed, he would catch like some sort of real moment.
The second movie I worked on, Little Giants, was Michael Tronick and Don Camber, and I got to assist for Don, who was the whole reason I wanted to become an editor. And from them, I learned the necessity to collaborate and not get too greedy about holding back. This is my scene, and because they had such a fluid exchange of ideas that Don would watch Michael's stuff and Michael would watch Don's stuff, and there was no ego, and it was wonderful.
I think that if you do sort of hold on to this as being precious, you don't have a chance to find any other ideas. Like, I remember I was working with Alexander Payne, and he said, this is working really well, but let's break it. Because by breaking it, it might not work, but if you break the pattern that you've used in cutting, you're going to discover some gems. And you can always go back to what you had, but those gems are going to come out of breaking the film a little bit, you know, by trying things that obviously you think, oh, that's never going to work in a million years. There's going to be a bunch of things that you think aren't going to work, and they're going to work.
Yeah, because I think of all the times where I've been in the chair and my director has said, hey, let's try this crazy idea. My instinct is to just do it immediately, even if I think, oh, this isn't going to work. Because if you do it and it works, you're a genius editor. You know, if you say, no, that's not going to work, and the director, which is a legitimate thing, the director says, well, you know, come on, let's try it, and it works, you're a jerk. You're a big dumb jerk.
And then you started editing live action movies.
Yes, that's right. I cut 3 or 4 live action movies. So, you know, you get into a thing where you think, okay, well, this is my life. I'm working for David Fincher and I'll be this fancy editor. And then you get a call one afternoon from a friend of yours from film school saying, hey, why don't you come cut this animated movie? And I said, Trey, I don't know anything about animation. He goes, don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. And that's how I started cutting the South Park movie.
So how is editing animation different from editing live action?
You know, that's a really good question. And many of my friends who cut live action films say, well, what do? Do you just cut off the head and tail and attach it all together? And I would answer it this way. Imagine every single one of the movies you're going to cut, you get called 2 years before they start shooting. And your director says, hey, here's the deal. I want you to sit with me and the writer, and let's figure the movie out together.
Wow.
Let's go ahead and write it. Sometimes you'll get a chance to write part of it. The writer will write part of it. Sometimes the director will work it. And we spend 2 years figuring out the story. And then once we've gotten the story figured out, then we spend the last year of usually a 3-year process actually shooting the movie, which is animating the movie.
And when you're shooting the movie, are you helping decide the different frames and the sizes and what would be good to see here?
Just to kind of give you a rundown, the animation is broken up into the phases which we call storyboard section. Then we go into layout, which is the equivalent of previs in live action. And then once everything's set in layout, that's where we say we want to be on a 50, we want an over, we want to do over. And then once we...
And you help decide.
That's right, that's right. And then after that, it goes into animation, which is where each shot is broken down and given to an animator. They animate it and it comes back to you and you retime it again. And then the last step is called lighting, which is where the lighting, film, resolution, textures, effects, everything is integrated together. And that's the version you see in the theaters. But in terms of the amount of time, you spend the first 2 years in storyboard mode. And
is that with the actors already having performed the script or after?
Yes, and actually the way it usually works is you'll get in actors which you call scratch actors. And in STORKS, this is kind of an interesting story. Our scratch actor was Katie Crown.
Who plays Tulip.
Who plays Tulip in the movie STORKS. She came in a group of scratch actors, temporary actors, to record the voices. And we liked her the most, and we cast her as Tulip. The idea is that you go through and you cut an entire version of the movie with temp actors, temp music, temp sound effects, everything together with storyboards. And you watch it and everyone says, yeah, this is pretty much the movie we're making. It's not set in stone, but it's about 70, 80% there. And then what happens at that point, you bring in your real actors, quote unquote, and replace them. They're usually name stars. We're like, for example, Andy, for example, or Key and Peele, or Jennifer Aniston. And then what happens is we record them, and they bring a whole nother level to the film.
Because they probably ad-lib a bunch of stuff,
That's exactly
too.
Right, yes.
And does that change everything
It changes
as well?
everything again. The thing about STORKS that's really very different than most of the animated movies I work on is Nick Stoller, the director. He was the kind of the live action component director.
Sure.
And Doug Sweetland was our animation component director.
Sure.
And the two of them co-directed this movie together. But Nick, this is his first animated movie. Well, Nick said from the start, he said, I don't want to do it this way because my process is getting in with funny people and workshopping things and doing improv in the room. And what happened was we would get in the room and we would do a read through of the script as written and almost immediately throw the script out. And what would happen is we would start improvising. And fortunately, I was in the room with Nick, kind of listening to the improv and kind of having to edit it in my mind, going, okay,
That's a good line.
That's a good line.
That's interesting.
That'll go there. And then I would turn to Nick and I would say, hey, we need a line to join this improv with this improv. And so we would write it in the room. And when I say we, I mean Nick, of course. We'd write it in the room and then we would give it to the actors and then they would go through and do the line. And then they would do improv on top of that line. So unlike most animated movies, you do one actor at a time, typically in isolation, and then you do the next actor, and then I actually create the performance in the cutting room.
Oh, so they're not overlapping
Hardly
each other?
ever. Nick wanted this to be more like what he's used to, which is having two actors in a room, improving off of one another.
Sure.
And that made such a difference that watching...
there's more energy, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow, well, that was funny. You almost died.
But it's interesting because you're like reverse engineering the editing. It's almost like the memento of editing. You're editing backwards. And
what ends up happening is we took the script and our story department, Matt Flynn and Craig Berry and many other Justin Rich, very talented storyboard artists would go through and each one of them would grab a scene and storyboard it. Before I start editing it, they'll go through and they'll say, because they've drawn it all, and they'll pick shot cuts. They're almost co-editors in a way because they'll go through and they'll say, we start on a wide shot and then we go to a close-up and they'll pitch it through. And then I'll watch Matt's sequence and I'll say, oh, hey, this is great, but can I I want to go to a medium shot or let's go over. And so you're even at the very beginning looking at the process of thinking like a cameraman at the beginning.
interesting.
And story artists are like actors and cameraman and editors, all in one package. And so what ends up happening is Nick would see it and then he would give notes and say, oh, that's really funny, or I missed this. And so we go through and we put the whole show together. I do my editing pass, timing, everything, sound effects with the temp dialogue, put it together, and then we watched it. It's almost like you show your director your editor's cut, the first cut, except now you can say, all right, do you want to go back and reshoot the movie again? Because we got the story guys and they're going to go through and redraw. And so that's what ends up happening. You iterate. And you want to try and get 3 or 4 passes at a scene before you really feel like you've gotten it right.
One of the things that I guess makes animation so great is that you can rewrite it at any time. I recently worked with Dana Gould, who was a writer on The Simpsons.
Yeah.
We were doing a live action thing, and he's like, it's tricky for me because I'm so used to being able to like come up with all these different things, after I've seen it.
In the beginning.
One of the scenes that I thought worked so wonderfully, the opening scene, because it's so clear this is what the story's about, where Storks came from, and this is where they're going now. And it really sets up the movie really well and very cleanly and very clearly.
Wait, that makes me so happy to hear you say that, because that opening that you see was probably the single most difficult scene in the entire film. Typically, you think, oh, endings are really hard. The ending wasn't the thing that almost killed us. It was the opening. Because in animation, you have, I wouldn't say it's a bigger problem, but it's a pretty big problem. You have to do world building. In animation, you have to answer questions like, number 1, animals can talk. Can humans understand them? Also explaining the world, a world where storks don't deliver babies anymore. So what ends up happening in animation is the cursed documentary opening. So we have a preview screening. We're about 4 or 5 months out from release, and we screen it, and the audience tells us very clearly, your opening is super boring. You have a great movie that we had to eat all these vegetables to get to the good tasting part of the meal.
She had to explain the story.
You have to explain the story. You know what? Audiences get it. They get it really fast.
And they're going to also get it as you proceed in the film.
Yes, that's right.
If it's a little bit, if they're a little confused, it's okay because they like the mystery. They like trying to figure it out, figure out the puzzle.
And you know what? Do you want an information dump or do you want to experience it through the character? So what ended up happening is that we had done, Matt Flynn had done a version of a trailer where you watch a stork just get pummeled and you hear how terrible it is delivering babies and how we're really glad that they're not delivering babies anymore. But the marketing department had decided not to use it. And that's when we realized, wait a minute, this really funny opening that we did for a trailer to get people to come see our movie is how we should open our movie. And so we took the documentary and the one piece of information that we needed, which was how Tulip became orphaned. We moved it into the scene where it felt way more organic. And then we started with this brand new opening. And that, by the way, we put together, added a new scene at the end, one scene in the middle so it would all tie together. We showed it to the audience. Our scores went up by like 18 or 19 points, which is insane.
I really like when Junior's with the boss and he talks to him about being the boss. And then his head basically explodes. And that whole thing was great. And then to redo it with Toady was great. Tell me a little bit about repetition and humor and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. Nick talks a lot about swings. He said you got to take big swings on jokes. The head exploding thing was absolutely Nick's sense of humor. That the idea that his mind is blown literally, that his mind is literally blown, and that it blows up the city and it blows up the entire planet. And that's a good case of us being in the room, the story artists and myself, and we were just kind of joking around. We were like, oh my God, wouldn't it be amazing if Pigeon Toady's had also exploded the same way? And so what happened was they boarded it, and we just reprised the same stock footage shots a second time. But then when I got into the cutting room and I did it, I cut it that way, and it was okay. It wasn't great. And then it took me a while to realize, oh wait, no, we have to change it up. We literally can't do the same exact thing. So that's the thing about repetition, repetitive jokes. You have to kind of take it and turn it a little bit. So what ended up happening is that I found our scratch actor, Stephen Glickman. He did this like really funny mouth thing, just offhandedly. And I realized that what I should do is I should go through and then hard cut back to him just making the sounds and spitting all over himself. And I had the story artist do up the drawings, and we did it, and that was it. It's interesting. The idea is that you push it as hard as you can until it's no longer funny, and then you keep going. Sometimes you get a little more juice out of it.
I think also the sound design helps with that stuff, and it helped with so many things, like you're going to have to take the bucket. The reason why that works is because the sound effect is so little.
It's so true. Michael Babcock. Michael Babcock was amazing on the show. Actually, one scene that I want to call out that he did the sound design on that was amazing was the silent fight with the penguins.
Well, I was going to mention that because there's so much sound throughout.
Yes.
And a lot of music, great music. And then we get to this Western standoff with the penguins, and they don't want to wake up the baby. So then it has to be really quiet.
Yes.
And it was brilliant because you just hear like just a little bit here and there.
Mike did a great job. He and his crew cut sound effects for everything. If there was a smash, there was a smash. And so he went through and we pulled out all the music, and it was just sound effects. We ran it for Nick, and he was like, yeah, it's good, but it's just something not quite right. And he goes, make it absolutely the quietest you can make, but still be able to be heard over the sound of kids eating popcorn. And that's what we did. And as soon as Babcock brought all the levels down, we played it, and it was hilarious.
Well, one montage that I just thought was brilliant. Well, I guess I'm not even sure if it was a montage. It was like straight out of like Sherlock when Toady becomes like the detective, and there's all these different images.
That's a good example of how we kind of create things in the cutting room, because the script will say CSI montage, and we don't really have a VFX crew, or it's like you would normally plan everything out. What ends up happening is you get the storyboard artist, and you kind of sit down. Yori was the storyboard artist on that scene, and he would kind of draw individual jokes. And then what would happen is I would realize, we need to kind of see the campsite and kind of places that we've been through the film, so you understand that the thing is also telling
He's
a small
tracking
story,
them.
small story that he's tracking them over the thing. And so what ended up happening is that I would ask for elements, and then I went into Photoshop and I pulled them onto transparent backgrounds, and I would just have things floating through, and I built like a 12-layer comp in the Avid.
One scene that was great was when Storks can't see glass. And Junior has to go through the glass. And then at a certain point, you started having these jump cuts of him hitting the glass again and again. And every time he hit the glass, his expression changed.
And it's a really interesting thing because in animation, everything is planned out. Every single thing is created from scratch. And so it's hard to get jagged rhythms. And so we did two things. Number one, I asked, right after storyboards, you go into layout, which is where they virtually shoot everything on a low-res digital set. And what I did is I said, I want you guys to give me as many angles of Junior running into things. And they gave me probably 40 or 50 different setups of, and I said, I want you to move the camera all over the place. I want it to be completely crazy, go freeform. And then what I did is I grabbed them all and I literally built a selects reel, and I intentionally jumped around and just built it together. And then what I did is I took it and I put it in and I just basically compressed it down. But what you see in the film is pretty much my random rough assembly. And then what happens is...
That's why it feels so fresh and
Yes.
real and live.
Yes, and then what ends up happening is our basically our director of photography, Simon Dunsdon, who is profoundly talented. He would add a small camera move. He would go through and kind of adjust focus. So like focus just kind of misses Junior a little bit. And then Doug would direct the animators to have Junior make the most crazy faces. Basically what happened was Brad came in, our producer came in, Brad Lewis, and said, all right, that's it. You're done with the scene. You can't noodle it anymore. And Nick goes, no, wait. We haven't figured out the button. And he said, okay, John, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take that last time of Junior running into the glass, and I just want you to loop it. Loop it like 8 times. It was literally him running into the same piece of glass, same sound effects, same everything. Bang, bang, kung, 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 kung.
I ran into every piece of glass, some more than once.
I love, like, soon after that when Toadie's walking out with a towel, and then the towel gets taken off, and you guys decided to put pixels there.
Yes.
Because it's like, well, you can't have a naked pigeon.
But the thing is honestly, so much of this movie was just us in a room trying to crack each other up. And those jokes, the ones that got the biggest laugh in the room, that's what ended up in the movie. But Nick was just insanely open to us in a way that made the movie what it is. And I'm so grateful to him.
A sequence that I really like too is the Silence of the Lambs.
This is one of the things in the film that I absolutely can claim ownership on. Craig McKay's editing on Silence of the Lambs is some of my favorite editing of any movie, and it's insane that movie came out the same year as JFK, because JFK is brilliantly edited. Joe Hutching and Pietro and Hank Corwin, and then Craig's editing on Silence of the Lambs. So it's like it's an embarrassment of riches. So I absolutely thought, oh my gosh, what if we just straight up did the Silence of the Lambs doorbell thing? And it appeals to me because you're perversely doing a serial killer joke in the middle of a kid's film. But that absolutely was absolutely intentional. And it was absolutely an homage to Craig.
It's great.
He's a genius editor.
And one thing I really liked about the film is that you would have a really fast-paced scene, like them deciding to use the plane. And then you'd go to the scene where the father talks to the son, and you'd really slow down the pace.
Oh, thank you. That's a huge compliment. Thank you. Obviously, we were strongly influenced by the Looney Tunes shorts, which at 7 minutes you can pace. You can have a pretty fast-paced thing, but you can't do that over the course of a film, because in a feature film, because you'll get exhausted. And so it was very much using the force most of the time. In most editing rooms that I have kind of an enormous 6-foot by 4-foot whiteboard, which I've cut into a grid, and each scene is up on the board, and it allows me to have the entire movie in my head. And so I would look at it and kind of see like, okay, we speed through this section, it's a really fast thing, then we need to give the audience a chance to relax. And that's one level where you just want to make sure not to fatigue the audience. But even more than that is just understanding when you want to really make the audience feel something for the characters.
Yeah, I mean, editing is a little bit like a roller coaster. If you're just going down the whole time, it's no fun.
Yes.
You have to have the anticipation of going up to the top.
Yeah.
And feeling that, and you can't take it to 11 and keep it there.
Yeah.
And I feel like sometimes you will see an animated film and it's just like, oh, we got to keep it fast, got to keep it fast.
Yeah.
And it's not just for kids, it's for the adults too. They have to enjoy the ride too.
Probably the best touchstone for me is really Chuck Jones's shorts that he did with Looney Tunes, because his jokes were amazing, but he had a real sense of heart, you know, a real that you really felt things.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed the movie. It was
Thank you.
fantastic.
Thank you.
Put down that baby.
Are you in love? I am in love. Are you in love? I'm in love too. I agree.